Good morning. It's Chris I'm here at Artistic Artifacts this morning, and we're going to talk about creative embroidery. And obviously, you can tell from the background, creative embroidery, mixing old with new, is something that's near and dear to the heart of actually what Judy does, how she created the business, and what she's instilled in a lot of the creative minds that hang out here at Artistic Artifacts. So I hope we inspire you this morning. Next week's Facebook Live will actually be from Judy's studio. So she and Kyle will be at home. Oh, not Judy's home, not Kyle's home anymore.
Not for a while.
But actually doing it's April Fool's Day. I'm not sure that that's why she's doing it that way, but it's an opportunity for all of us to see her studio and where she creates and what she does. So to get started, I thought I would mention that both Judy and I were asked a couple years ago when Christen Brown had her one of her books to participate in a round robin, or actually do a sample for her book. So at that time, it was this hand embroidery dictionary, and we were asked to do basically one stitch and do pretty much like a sampler. So my piece for that was I did the cross stitch, and for those of you who know, I like painter's thread. So all of this was done, different stitches, different versions of a cross stitch with painter's thread, which are all hand-painted threads, all different textures, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my piece today. So that's how we got introduced to Christen, was playing with creative stitches, how they turn out using different colors, different threads, different weights of threads in the stitches. So Christen's been working on a new book, which actually I was supposed to have downloaded my e-copy this morning and I forgot. It's actually being released today. It's called Creative Embroidery, Mixing the Old with the New. We have it on our website, and it's been a pre-order. I know it's being actually released today, so hopefully our orders will come in, and that's what we're promoting today and talking about today, is her most recent book from C&T Publishing. So Diane Herbert, who is a creative mind here, is a good friend of Christen's, and actually created a piece that's in the book. So this is Diane's piece, and it's actually some vintage fabrics. When we've looked at it closely, she's actually, each of her wedges are cut separately, and she's done all kinds of decorative stitches, embellishment, different thread weights, obviously lots of buttons. Here's some snaps. Lots of lazy daisy stitches, using some vintage lace to to outline her circles. I mean, you could just keep looking and looking and seeing more stitches and more embellishment. So this piece is in the book, and it's also a glimpse of it's on the back cover. Look at this, is a fun one, mixed with the cross stitches. So that's Diane's piece in there, and Diane contacted me. So what Christen wanted to do to promote the book last week and this week is to have a round robin challenge between 3 to 4 people, and we were each to work with a 10 to 11 inch square, start the piece ourselves, and hand it off to the next person. And when we handed it off, we were supposed to give them all the threads and ephemera and things that we wanted to use on the particular piece. So in addition to Diane and me, we also had Nancy Cars. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit about how I approached the challenge with a much trepidation because they're much more talented than me in their stitching. But it was a fun challenge, and I learned a lot, and it actually took me far out of my comfort zone. So to get started, Christen sent us a bunch of guidelines of what she wanted. And then she sent us, because the book wasn't published yet, she sent us a list of 100 different stitches that we could possibly try as we did our pieces. So there were flower and shape stitches, there were individual stitches, continuous ones. I've kind of marked some of the ones that we used. She had embellishment stitches. And then she also had some other decorative ideas, how to use ribbons and trims, how to use decorative trims, little stitching extras, beading. So she provided us with lots of information. So for me to get started, I took her list of 100 stitches, and she actually referred to where they were in this book. And as you can see, I kind of mark the different stitches, the different options of the stitches, so that when I was ready to do my stitching, I could refer to this and see, because I'm a French knot person, I had to push myself a little bit more than just doing French knots all over my piece. So I had to actually look and say, oh, this would be a great stitch for this part of either my piece or Diane's or Nancy's piece. So that was kind of my Bible as I work through. And the other Bible that I use is, as everybody knows who's followed me, is I used Ruth Chandler's Modern Hand Stitching. Ruth's book is actually awesome to me because what she does is she provides the basic stitch, and then she has the no boundaries. So lots of the same stitches as in Christen's book. She just gives you a little bit of ideas how you can push it a little bit more. And there's certain stitches that I just go to every time because I don't remember where I start my buttonhole stitch. So I look at this and it's like, oh yeah, that's where you start. So I'll start with my piece. So this is actually my finished piece. But how I started was I had a pack of, and this is a different pack. I wonder what I do with the rest of it. So I had a pack of overdyed kimono silk from Laura Murray Designs. I've picked them up at quilt shows along the way. I've used them for a number of different things. They make wonderful silk scarves. But I had several packs of these. So what I did is using the Wonky Log Cabin trim tool that I had actually tested for Jean Ann Wright. It's a Creative Grids ruler, but I had just tested it like the month before, and I thought, perfect way to use the silks, new tool. And so my original block was I actually used a piece of the Painter's Thread Even Weave in the center block. And then I fussy cut, because what I wanted to do is make sure, rather than just cutting a strip to add to the Wonky Log Cabin, I wanted to make sure I got these different colors in there in different pieces. So I did fussy cut the strips that I made for my log cabin. So I got my fabrics, and then I gathered my supplies. And as you can see, most of these are painter's threads. So I had silk ribbon, and I'm a messy thread person, I had various weights of, so I had 12, 8, and 5 weight of the cotton pearl. I had some silk. I had gimp, 2 kinds of gimp. I had some thread. I had a little bit of trim in the silk ribbon, along with the even weave. So that was my starting point. Oh, and I had these fun buttons that Nancy Yonahiro, who is handmade their copper buttons. And in my stash, I had these fabric beads that Judy had made eons ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Sorry.
And then this rust-dyed, actually cut this out of another remnant, so I trimmed it up to be a flower here on the piece. So I added, my first part that I added and handed off was simply adding this piece, tacking it down. I did a little bit of, this is a feather stitch with some French knots. And then I couched the gimp with some simple stitches. So when it was time to pass it on, I put all this in a really fancy-dancy Ziploc bag and handed it over to Nancy, who then did her magic on it. So Nancy actually added, she ruched, she did some ruching with the silk ribbon. The gimp is woven in and out there. I think Diane added the beads. Nancy added some more of the buttons with a nice buttonhole stitch around it. She added this nice snail trim. And then she handed it off to Diane, who found a way to adhere this bead that doesn't have a center hole in it. So she actually anchored it down and then had some beads on it. Some beautiful stitches, and she's got some great, this is again the ribbon. She's done some nice little French knots with the ribbon. And I had no idea that you could use the ribbon to stitch like this. She put some Lazy Daisy with some beading in it and another to highlight this. And I must say, when I got this piece back, when Diane handed it over to Mimi, I was just flabbergasted. I would have never been able to do this myself, or didn't think I could do it myself. Now I probably could, but I was just gobsmacked. And it's not finished, because obviously I go on to other projects. But I'm thinking, I have these two pieces, and I'm thinking it will be something like this, where it will still be a small piece, and whether I mount it on a canvas or make it just a smaller. This is a piece of Vietnamese silk. I think this is actually a cherry wood from my stash, but that's where it will go at some point. Any questions at this point?
No.
Nope. Okay.
Lots of, yeah.
Okay.
Lots of wows.
So.
I didn't know those fabric beads still existed. That is a...
Oh, I had them in a little bag in my stash. We all have our stashes. So the next piece that I got to work on myself was Diane's. And again, I think one of the things that I did find intimidating was, where does she want to take this piece? What does she want to do with it? And it was like, that's not the part of the thing. It's like, where do we go with it? We all added our individual. So Nancy uses the same kind of very fancy travel bags, project bags that I use. So I got her black and white crazy quilt. She had put the buttons on, but not all of the embellishment. She had also put some of the rickrack on in the trims for her crazy quilt. But there wasn't much else done by the time I got it. And then, she sent over some eleganza. We had some nice rayon. She had some beautiful colors of DMC. She had some, and hers are all except for these two were solid colors, which I like working with variegated. So again, it was a little bit of a challenge. And then look at all these beads she had. So it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to work on this piece? So I started with one of the pieces of ribbon. I did the buttonhole stitch with some French knots. She had these wonderful beads, and this was just the right amount. I think I used all of them. And again, I believe I used First Time Beading book to look at this, how to attach these beads. This little piece of fabric was fun, so I added some fly stitches with French knots. And then I went back in a number of her lace trims and added some French knots in different colors. I added French knots here and then beading. This is an Australian fabric. And I could have just kept right on going with French knots because that's what I like. But I think at that point I said, oh, I know what I did. I actually added some ribbons and some French knots in some of the button flowers that she had. But look at these are snaps. So she's got nice little stem stitches and flowers, and then she's added the snaps. And then she passed it on to Nancy. And oh my God, look at all this work here. So these are all flowers and rosettes. They're beading around them, but these were all using the silk ribbons. There's more of that to counter it up here in this piece. This design, it was fun to go ahead and outline the triangles in that. I think that one when I did. These buttons, I really like these little beads. And they're sewn on around the edges within a bead in the middle. Nice feather stitch, some more beads. More French knots. And then I think when Diane got it back, she kept adding to it. And in talking to Diane, she sees this as the center panel of a larger quilt. So again, she hasn't finished hers. I know Diane's working on some other deadlines, so this is not the finished product of hers either. I see some places where I know Diane will go in and add some embellishment, but then she does see it as a larger quilt in the future. Look at this. So she even added a little tiny trim in here. So all those little vintage trims and laces and rickrack, there's just lots of opportunities to use them. I'm going to put that like that because I unloaded all of her beads. All right. And then the next one was far more organized than Nancy passed hers along in a very nice case with all of her selection. Easy to look at, easy to find, eyeball, and we had her piece. So Nancy started out with a vintage hanky, some indigo dyed lace that she trimmed and put on, and then she had this flower yo-yo, and it was a vintage flower yo-yo. The fabric, you could tell, was really definitely vintage. So she added those. She used Christen's, one of her stencil patterns for these little wool vases in the corner, and added a couple little stems to those, some vintage snaps. And she had also added some of these vintage sacks. These are awesome. These are like covered with silk ribbon. And when Diane got it, the piece, she said that she realized that Nancy wanted kind of a mandala look to it. So Diane expanded by doing some buttonhole or blanket stitch around the edge. And then she added some of these filigrees, these vines, in different sizes. So they've got different stitches. She added some buttons. I don't remember whether Diane or Nancy had added these wonderful little bird beads. And a couple flowers in the vases, a couple beads, both glass, these check glass beads and other beads. And then it was handed off to me. The first thing I knew, and I actually knew when I saw the piece the first time, is I wanted to add some cross stitch in this edging of the hanky. So I did. It's a very fine, it's a 12 weight variegated thread. So I used that in the variegated to do. I thought the vases were a little bit, needed a little bit of something. So I took her vintage buttons and snaps. I added those to 2, and then I added some French knots in the corner. And then all of these nice vines that Diane had created, I added lots of French knots. So it's fun to use. I mean, she's much more orderly in her threads than I am. So these are some painter's threads as well. These were the little buttons. Look at these. These are so cool. And these, look at these snap fasteners. They're just awesome. So you never know what vintage finds you're going to have. Who knows how old these are?
Oh, we do have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is there interfacing or batting on the back of this piece?
Yes, she has a piece of felt. But that was not there when we stitched it. So when we stitched it, as you can see, we were stitching right on the hanky. But this piece of fabric was out on the edge, so you, Nancy knew that she wanted to fold that extra fabric in so that the lace on the hanky showed up. So I would imagine this piece will go on something a little bit darker, again, so you see that you actually can see the beauty of the lace. I mean, that picks up the colors that she has in the piece. But so no, so she added the felt just to tack it down, and she tacked the pieces back. The other piece I added is she had some really fun, I assume that that's organza ribbon. So I did Lazy Daisy stitches here, made some nice flowers, added the beads, added more French knots to embellish that centerpiece.
Not a question, but Catherine Miller says French knots are therapeutic.
Oh my God, they are. It's just, especially with painter's thread. If you haven't tried painter's thread, I just spilled all the beads. Not the beans, the beads. So painter's threads come in all of these luscious colors. Many of them are named after, so this is Gauguin, this is Van Gogh, this is Turner. So they're named after artists, and they come in multiple weights. So this is silk, this is gimp, this one is pearl cotton, a 5 weight, this one is an 8 weight, a 3 weight. So you can see the difference in what the texture is. But the part that I like when I'm doing a French knot with, you couldn't do a French knot with gimp because you'd never get it in a needle. with any of these, and each stitch shows up a different color. So even though, and actually you might be able to see it a little bit here, so that's all the same thread, but each stitch comes out a different color. So not only is and I might wrap it 2 times, I might wrap it 3 times, sometimes I even wrap it 4 times. It depends on how big a French knot I want, but I'm looking at the color. And the reason my thread looks like this is when I take and I'm ready to do a stitch, I'm actually saying, of this, I want to capture this red. So I'm going to take my thread, and rather than it on a spool where you're getting what you get, I take it and I want to cut this, I'll cut my piece like this so that somehow when I'm doing my stitches that red shows up. But there's so many. This is the ribbon. And again, you can see because it's hand painted, there were lots of different colors. So when that was used in the piece, each of these trims showed up as a different color because the ribbon was like that. The same with the ruching. It really highlights the color. But there's so many different options. This is the trim that we use. It's called single loop. I didn't use this silky eye on this one, but it is on this, where I actually used 2 pieces touching each other and excuse me, tacked them down with cross stitches. So inspiration, I hope we've inspired you today. But I said, Kristen's new book is coming out, released today. This is another good Bible to have in your, and we have it online, is her hand embroidery dictionary. Great reference. I use chenille needles myself, and I like these mixed pack because if I'm using, it has a large eye, and so if I'm going anywhere from a 3 to a 12 weight, there's a needle in that pack that will meet my need. Large eye, good point. Some people prefer the embroidery needle, but all of the tulip needles are good.
Oh, do you suggest using all the same weight fabrics in each piece?
The same weight fabrics? No. This one I actually have a piece, I have that even weave linen in it. You could use, and that's kind of what I was going to suggest, is just some alternatives here. I mean, you could do a block with our inspiration packs. This one is Coleus, but there's lots of options in there and what you do to create your piece. This one has some color coordinated also. It's kind of like the inspiration, but we provide a little bit of thread and some needles, and this is our hand-dyed treasure bags, pieces of silk. You could use Indian fabrics. I mean, your block can start as anything. I mean, this was a challenge to do a block, but you know, when Judy does one of her books, I mean, she's got all kinds of, this is cheesecloth, she's got regular cotton, she's got the Indian cottons, which are lighter. This looks like a piece of batik. So whatever you have, and it's using your fabric. Look at these little yo-yos we have. They're assorted colors. They're tie yo-yos, so that's in our ephemera. Here's another one where, you know, Judy's using lots of different fabrics, some thin. This is a caif. She's mixed it with a piece of muslin, some commercial fabrics. This is actually one of her, she screen printed that or jelly plated it. So no, you are not limited to using a single weight of thread or fabric.
We have a request to see your the first piece again.
This piece, my sample?
Oh, this one.
This one, okay. But the other, I mean, is to look at Judy's. I mean, Judy didn't participate in the round robin, but Judy's been doing mixing the old with the new for years, in all her pieces. So, I mean, this is kind of the signature logo for the shop. And this has got, you know, a lot of different fabrics. She's got buttons, all kinds of buttons. This one's got a piece of vintage. It's indigo dyed lace that she's cut out in the butterfly. Again, some commercial fabric, some painted fabric. So you can go with whatever you want. This piece, I believe, is going to be, is actually a photo transfer, and I believe it's in Leslie Riley's new book, which is coming out next month.
Yeah.
Comes out, I believe, April 25th next month. So Judy and I both have a piece in that, and so this was Judy's, but again, this is painted paper, regular paper, linen that she's done a photo transfer on, lots of buttons, ephemera, silk lace. So you can use whatever you want, and what Christen's books give you is ideas on how to embellish your piece. It doesn't have to be a mixed media like this. It can actually just be a nice piece. It can be vintage. It can be, I use a lot of her stitches when I make my rice bags. So it's how you can embellish, use her stitches that she shows you on embellishing a jacket and embellishing your clothes. So it's just inspiration. It's all inspiration, and it's like, okay, how do I do something a little bit different? So
They want to know about your jacket.
Yes, I was going to say lots of comments about your jacket. They want to see the back.
all right, so the jacket is from the shop. So they selected this one because they thought it would fit me. I was out sick for a while, so they selected this one. This was how it was first. So this was how it was hanging on the hanger, which is awesome. So it was the yellow with the plaid as the collar. But when I got it home, I just loved this inside plaid, and I'll probably wear it both ways. But I love the fact these are made, these are the ones that Judy got from when she was in India. They are made from vintage StitchesnQuilts, and so they're not in perfect condition. So if there was an imperfection, they just added a little patch to it. And I think this one has a little patch, which is part of what I really love. So I'll put it back on because I love the shawl collar.
Let's see the inside real quick with the orange.
And some of that's on the back. So when you get, obviously there wasn't enough of this nice blue plaid. But there's some here in the shop. I think there might be a few left on the comments or on our Artistic Artifacts app, which is the app that we use for our live sales. I think there might be one or two there. The others are in the shop. And there's 4 more boxes of new shipment from India sitting in the warehouse, and we started opening it up yesterday. So you're not sure when we'll see that, but there were some more closed. And the other thing that I found the other day, if I'm modeling, I might as well model. So it's dangerous to come in here. So she has some of these too that are not available yet, but there's a few hanging in the store, but they're not on the web. And I have to give a shout out. My scarf is a Cindy Grisdella. It's her design that she had printed on for a scarf. So it all goes with the color. So, any other questions?
Well, there's some people that are just joining, asking what was talked about. We encourage you to go watch the video when it uploads to our Facebook page.
Probably about 20 minutes. It probably
20
takes
minutes,
about
yeah.
20 minutes. And then we will get it on our YouTube channel probably Monday or Tuesday. And so all of our videos from Saturday morning, we do save. They are on our Facebook page, but you can also watch them on our Artistic Artifacts YouTube channel. So we've been doing this for these weekly Facebook Lives. We've been doing for about 1.5 years, 2 years now. So there's a nice, there's Bernina ones, there's mixed media ones, there's fabric ones. So there's lots to see depending on, and we have playlists for depending on if you're a fiber artist or a mixed media artist, or you just need some Bernina tips and tricks. Okay?
And I have put links to the books.
Okay, good.
Here, so keep those, Jamie.
And Judy is our person in the comments today dropping links. So everyone say hello.
We switch roles today. So it's usually Judy in front of the camera and me on the computer, and we switch roles today. So I think the store's opening, so we've got to close. And Judy and Kyle, I'll see you next week in Judy's studio. Thanks for joining this morning.